the pick-and-mix scoop hovering over the tray, the smell of a department store cafe at lunchtime, the Saturday morning trip into town when the high street was the centre of the world. Woolworths was on every high street in Britain. British Home Stores was where the whole family shopped, and we were sure, every one of us, that they would be there forever. Today, almost all of them are gone. These were the shops we grew up with, the ones we thought would always be waiting for us on the corner. Now they live only in memory. So come with me back down the British High Street as it used to be, through the great shops that vanished, and everything that made each one unforgettable. You knew Woolworths the moment you walked through the door. The pick and mix just inside, the little paper bag, the metal scoop, and the agonizing question of whether to risk the foam bananas. And you knew the jingle too, the one that promised you the wonder of Woolworths. First sung on the television in 1975 and lodged in the national memory ever since. Frank Woolworth opened his very first British store on Church Street in Liverpool on the 5th of November 1909, the first Woolworths anywhere outside America. For most of the century there was a Woolies in almost every town in the land. Your Ladybird school clothes came from there, your chart singles came from there. And then, over 11 days between Christmas and the 6th of January 2009, every single one of its 807 shops was shut, and 27,000 people lost their jobs. One retail expert called it the first domino of the high street's collapse. The most familiar name in Britain was simply gone. For decades, British home stores stood at the heart of every town centre. BA, everyone called it. It began in Brixton in 1928, set up by a group of Americans who wanted to copy Woolworths, and to avoid a direct fight, they made one rule: nothing in the shop would cost more than a shilling. It was where your mum bought the school jumpers and the lampshades, where the lighting department glowed with 100 lamps all switched on at once, and where the whole family stopped for lunch in the store cafe. It lasted 88 years, and then, in 2016, it collapsed with a pension black hole of over £500 million after its owner had sold it for £1 to a man with no experience of running a shop. 164 stores closed. Members of Parliament called what had happened the unacceptable face of capitalism. C&A was where a whole generation was clothed. The wide glass frontage, the sweeping staircases, the smell of new fabric the moment you stepped inside. It was Dutch, and the name stood simply for the two brothers who founded it, Clemens and August. The first British shop opened right next to Selfridges on Oxford Street in 1922. For families, it was the place you went for a winter coat that would last, a first proper suit, a school anorak. It was so woven into British life that in Only Fools and Horses, when Del Boy dreamed of being rich, he promised Rodney their clothes would one day be Man at C&A. And then, in 2001, C&A pulled out of Britain altogether. 113 stores emptied, nearly 5,000 people lost their jobs, and Primark moved into a good many of the buildings they left behind. Do you remember Rumbelows? When it was time for something big, a new telly, a music centre, a twin-tub washing machine, Rumbelows was where a lot of families headed. It grew out of a single electrical shop in Hatfield and spread to hundreds of branches. And for 2 seasons at the start of the 1990s, it put its name to the League Cup, so the Rumbelows Cup echoed around Wembley itself. Here is the part almost nobody remembers. In 1991, to make the draw for the 5th round, the television presenter St. and Greavesy flew to New York and did it alongside a property developer named Donald Trump. But the shops were losing £12 million a year and had never once turned a profit in 24 years of trying. In February 1995, all 285 of them closed. Tandy was the little electronics den, the place you went for a battery, an odd cable, or one small pack of components that nobody else in town would stock. It was the British side of the American Radio Shack, and the man behind the counter always seemed to understand exactly which fiddly part you meant, even when you had no idea what it was called. For anyone who soldered anything, built anything, or owned one of the very first home computers, Tandy was the shop. By the end of the 1990s, the British stores had been sold off, and the name quietly disappeared from the parade. Littlewoods was a whole world of its own. There was the shop, But there was also the catalogue, that enormous book that arrived at home and let you buy anything on the Never Never, a little each week through your club. And underneath it all were the pools. John Moores started Littlewoods in Liverpool in 1923 as a football pools business, and he chose that odd name deliberately to hide what he was doing from the bosses at the telegraph office where he still worked. The catalogue came later, in 1932, aimed squarely at women. For generations, the coupon and the catalogue were part of the furniture of British life. The original company, 4,000 people strong, was finally wound up in 2005, and the famous names slipped away onto the internet. There was Kwik Save and Fine Fare, the supermarkets a generation actually did the weekly shopping. Kwik Save, with its plain yellow and red signs and its no-frills shelves, where families watching every penny made the money stretch. And whichever shop you used, there were the green shield stamps, handed over at the till, licked into little books at the kitchen table, saved up for months and swapped for a toaster or a set of tumblers from a catalogue of gifts. That entire ritual, the stamps, the saver books, the licking and the sticking, has vanished completely, and so have most of the shops that ran it. MFI was where the nation furnished its homes, flat-packed and jammed into the back of the car. A new kitchen, a wardrobe, a bookcase, all in long flat boxes with a bag of screws and an instruction sheet that never quite made sense. It was founded in 1964 by two men who had met at an auction of leftover wartime government stock, and its name was really just their old company, Mullard Furniture Industries, shortened down. For a generation, setting up a first home on a budget, a Sunday afternoon at MFI was almost a rite of passage. Then B and Q and Homebase and a Swedish giant called IKEA came for the same customers, and by 2008 MFI had collapsed and gone. Comet was where you bought the big electricals, the fridge, the freezer, the television, the video recorder. Great bright warehouse shops on the edge of town, stacked to the ceiling with boxes and stuffed by people in uniform. For years it was one of the two names everyone in Britain knew for electricals. But the internet came for it the way it came for so many others, and just before Christmas in 2012, Comet switched off its lights for the last time, and more than 6,000 people lost their jobs. And then there was Blockbuster. Friday night in Britain had a routine, and it began with a trip to Blockbuster. That blue and yellow sign you could spot from the end of the road, the wall of new releases, the quiet dread that the film everyone wanted would already be gone. You chose your video, carried it to the counter, handed over the membership card, and there it was on the sticker, the same 5 words every single time. Be kind, please rewind. And you swore you would remember to bring it back before the late fee. Then streaming arrived, and by 2013 every British blockbuster had gone dark, and Friday night was never quite the same again. Every one of these shops has its own story and its own place in the memory of anyone who grew up walking those high streets. The town centres they filled, the Saturday mornings they made, are not entirely gone. They live on in all of us who still remember them. So which of these shops do you miss the most? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this took you back, subscribe to Dear Old Britain, and the next trip down memory lane, the sweets and snacks that vanished from British shelves, is waiting for you on screen right now.